This is not a photo of me, in case anyone was wondering. Neither of these is me.
I have not seen this actually. Now I've got to see this soon.
It is absolutely worth it. The Devil's Advocate is not only one of my favorite movies, but it's one that I've studied, written about. Anyway, another lifetime. Today I'm going to talk to you about user-adjacent development. I think it's a little bit different from the way it was described on your syllabus, but hopefully the meaning will become quite clear. Or how I discovered that I'm part Dalmatian. And I really wish that the ambulance services would come up with a nifty mascot like the Dalmatian so that I can say the other part of me is whatever that is. But user-adjacent development is really what I'm going to talk to you about here. Yes, your design thinking and co-creating with the community. And to me, I hope you'll find that the theme today is about not only co-creating, but that if you're not in the trenches with your, well, you know what? I'm going to let John Milton use the phrase. Learn the subways, Kevin. Use them. Stay in the trenches. The only way I travel. In this movie, the lead lawyer, John Milton, we see here, is a very, very, very powerful legal figure. He's kind of like a Mike Bloomberg in the law. You know, I mean, very, very wealthy, very, very much top of the world. And yet, the only way he travels is in the subway. There were stories, I don't know whether they're true or not, but there were stories for many years that Mike Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, would travel primarily in the subways. I think that was more occasional than consistent, but the idea of how can you understand the people if you're not among the people? You know, if you're taking a helicopter above them all the time, or even sitting in a black car, you're not in where the people are. And so when it comes to creating solutions, especially during moments of crisis, how can you purport to do that successfully if you're not quite literally touching adjacent to the folks who are going to ultimately use it? And so with your permission, this is kind of what I want to take you through today from my experience. And it might be wise to at least give you a little bit of context. Alessandro, thank you so much for the kind words about us. We, as a company, are a very small team. So I have essentially a startup that has managed to survive for 11 years now. We are one of the only health IT startups anywhere that actually turns a profit consistently. So we managed to not only achieve our mission of really caring for the agencies that we serve and the patients that they serve. But as a CEO, I of course have other masters as well, which are our shareholders and our partner clients, as well as our team members. And we've managed to take care of all of them. So we're pretty proud of that. We're wiry, we're nimble, we are in the thick of some remarkable trends like COVID-19. Obviously, that's a big one, but it's not the only one. You mentioned substance use disorders. That's another huge topic, and we are really leading in many ways our industry on that. We work with fire and EMS, or now is being called mobile medicine agencies, in 27 states. And again, there's less than a half dozen of us on this team. So we are about as in the thick of it as it gets when it comes to a bootstrapped startup that has managed to find a foothold. And we really think that that is about understanding what the end user is going to need. And so that's what I'm going to take you through today. But I wanted you to know that this is not, you know, I wouldn't say I have answers to everything, but we've managed to figure some things out because, as to reference another movie, show of hands if you've seen The Matrix. Alessandro, please tell me you've seen The Matrix. Thank you. Very good. So there is a line that Morpheus says that I quote often, and I grew up in Los Angeles, so forgive me that I kind of lived through the movies. But he says, what happened and couldn't have happened any other way. How do we know? We are still alive. And I think that is pretty much the definition of entrepreneurship. I was once quoted by the San Francisco Chronicle, and again, I think this is relevant to you guys. As you develop for public health, both now and forward. You know, when you talk to a reporter, and I've been one for a long time, in another life, I was a media guy, I still am. you talk to a reporter, you never know what they're going to quote you on. And so a couple of years ago, through Startup Health, in association with their conference here out in California, I spoke to a reporter about entrepreneurship, particularly in healthcare. And I wasn't sure what they were going to quote. I was a little concerned. And what they ended up picking up was wonderful. It was my definition of entrepreneurship. And I describe it as follows. It is, quote, finding ways to survive until the world wants what you have to offer. You will, there will be many things that you will hear people do as they start up their businesses. Some of them run second jobs, right? Some of them consult and all kinds of other things that people do. And it's really about giving yourself the time to understand what the problem is that you're going to solve. Because thinking you understand the problem, but not actually being in the trenches where the problem is being experienced, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So you have a big idea. And in this case, we're going to talk about public health and whatnot. But I don't think this is necessarily limited in any way to healthcare. Whether you're talking about finance, whether you're talking about a widget, whether you're talking about a phone, or something completely non-technical, you think you have a big idea. How do you know? Right? These are really kind of the four main categories as I thought through what have I experienced, what have I learned on the ways that people get information. Right? I mean, they're pretty broad categories. You can research them, associate with a university, for example, an excellent collection of universities that breeds even more excellent people. That's me, just so you know. Okay. So you can research and use the insights of others in that way. And there's all sorts of, knowledge around how you research and where you research and primary and secondary and all that stuff. The reason I say that is because it's not always like it is in the books, right? I mean, if you look at mobile medicine, EMS and fire, and if you thought you understood everything about the industry from reading the New York Times, it's not irrelevant, but it's a facet, right? And so the way you research and the trades and all that sort of stuff is pretty interesting to understand how to balance those. Anecdotes, you can get by talking to people, going out and interviewing them and asking questions and talking among your social network and listening to Facebook and LinkedIn and so on and so forth. And again, there's an enormous amount of insight to be gained from those contexts. At the same time, you are going to face some limitation in terms of the breadth of your network, right? And I think this is just kind of a reality, but it's important to understand that, if you're talking to friends or friends of friends, the people who are self-selecting to talk to you are going to have a perspective. And I can tell you after 11 years in this industry and having pissed off all the right people, and there are some people who are, in fact, I like to think that they on the one hand, they sort of see me coming when I'm getting engaged in a conversation, but they've been welcoming to the idea that dissent is not a bad thing. All right, conversation is an essential part of the work that we do. So anecdotes and sort of realizing that the people who agree with you are not always the people you want to be talking to. You want to be talking to people who think you're crazy as well, because they're going to give you insights as to things you might otherwise be missing. That's the second tier here. Experience, going out there into the field, going out on the line. We're going to talk a lot about that today. But you're not always going to have the opportunity to do that. Let's use an example, right? That's been in the news a lot lately, space, right? So you're not necessarily going to have to be an astronaut to understand space or how to work for it, right? As far as I'm aware, Elon Musk may have been born on another planet, but he's not actually living on one. And I actually have to use myself in that regard as well, because I'm not a medic. I have a little bit of experience. I joined something locally relevant to you guys. I joined the military on September 11th. Kind of an important day that changed the world. I think that's the understatement of the century. And even to those of us who were not there, certainly changed our world. I have Tourette syndrome. If I'm a little twitchy on screen, it's not you, it's me, I promise. And so I was training I went into the Army to be a field medic. That was my job, my MOS, military occupational specialty. And because of my condition, I didn't complete it. So I'm not a medic, but I work with them. I surround myself with paramedics and EMTs and firefighters and former and current and people who work in health information exchange and billing and so on and so forth. And so even though I don't necessarily have the experience they do, and I'm really trying to glean as much from their knowledge as I can, and whenever I can, again, as we'll talk to, get out there in the back of the truck, go out and see. But the experience isn't necessarily yours in the field per se, but making sure you're around it enough that you really understand all the pieces. Again, if you can't go up in the capsule, in the rocket, in the International Space Center, maybe ensure that you go to Houston or you go to Cape Canaveral and you spend a lot of time there. It's not just about going to your local space museum or natural history museum. You want to make sure you're in it. So that's the experience part. And then intuition. And intuition is for anyone who trades in the stock market, intuition is another word for guessing or gambling or kind of assuming that you have some idea what you're talking about. That's not irrelevant. There is something to be said for recognizing that there's a problem. And in fact, to give you a quote of a pretty smart guy in this regard, I'm going to quote Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is very well known for having said something to the effect of invest in what you know. At some point you have a lived experience, right? If you live in New York City, you understand things about New York City. Do you understand how to run New York City? Probably not. But you understand things about New York City. And so you will have a sense of where there's a problem, or you've heard friends of yours complain about something, or you walked into a hospital. I gotta tell you, I have a friend of mine. She's a very important healthcare investor, a wonderful, insightful person, consultant, speaker, etc. And she talks all kinds of presentations about healthcare IT. But she'd never been in the back of an ambulance until she had a heart condition. And she wrote about it. She wrote a really moving blog about the fact that she was actually on my company's board at the time. And she understood what we were doing, but she'd never been in the back of the truck. And so as she was in the truck as a patient now, not solving problems, but experiencing problems, it became blindingly obvious. And she writes about the fact that her cardiac strips, or EKG strips, which are essentially printouts of what the monitor told her heart was doing at the time, ended up getting left at the hotel room when they took her to the hospital. So, you don't necessarily have to have a whole lot of knowledge to realize that's probably an issue. But her intuition, and this was Lisa Sunan, by the way, so if anyone wants to look her up, she blogs under the name Venture Valkyrie, and her blog is absolutely worth a read. Her intuition was able to tell her that's a problem, right? There are clearly efficiencies here. I don't think she would have purported to know how to solve them, but that's where the other things come in, right? So your intuition can kind of lead you to these other things, just like in my case, research and digging into some issues that seemed problematic kind of led us to some critical numbers that allowed us to focus on our business. And so all of this is to say, who cares? And I think we're all adults here, so you can imagine some other more expletive-laden versions of this question. Who cares? Why does it matter? The idea that you have a big idea, again, you're based in New York City. Everybody on any street corner, anywhere in the city, you have like 12 million big ideas floating around the city at any given time. So I have another slide in another presentation that cites another movie, which is Training Day. Anybody seen Training Day? All right, good. We're Alessandro's my gauge for how cool the rest of you are. And so the quote from that movie is, "It's not what you know, it's what you can prove." Right? So just the fact that you think you have a big idea, the question is it a big idea, or is it only a big idea to you? And it turns out that places like business schools actually are pretty good at teaching people how to gauge the answers to that question. And so I want to make sure I give credit to where this came from. This model came to me through the Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business. We're not MIT, but we're proud. So Stratogen is a consultancy here in the San Francisco Bay Area that came up with this model called objective-driven innovation. It is one of about 4 things I remember from business school. And I have actually given it a different name, which is the who gives a shit matrix. And so without going into all the details on it, it's actually really fascinating to read about, and I would encourage any of you to go to the website and read it. So you say, I wrote "Who gives a hoot?" I didn't say "Who gives a hoot." In case any of you is paying attention to my slides. What this model essentially allows you to do is to put on a matrix, quite literally. It's a chart. Can be structured in a couple different ways, as most charts can, but it's a chart that looks at the degree of pain associated with a problem and the willingness to pay for a solution. And so the fact that you have problems, I mean, you can imagine there are many problems that you'll see on a daily basis. For example, the shape of a paperclip is really quite inconvenient. There are lots of things around you that are problems that you deal with, but they're not really so painful that anybody's willing to pay for them, to fix them or to innovate something new. And then, or the barrier is really high, to getting into markets and so on. On the other hand, there are probably some pain points that you've looked at, and certainly we have a lot of these in public health, by the way, that are kind of like, why? I mean, how many diabetes tracking apps do you really need? How many pedometer apps do you really need? It turns out the problem is actually really big. Diabetes and diabetic neuropathy and weight loss and all of these, sedentary lifestyle. I mean, we're sitting here talking to each other, right? The problems are real. There really are issues around that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the barriers are very high to get in, and it doesn't necessarily mean that people are willing to pay very much to use them. And in fact, when you look at healthcare apps in particular, their fall off is unbelievably high. Right? There are the technology world over the last 5 to 10 years is littered with apps that actually raised an enormous amount of money, and it turns out after about 3 months, people stop using them, and 3 months is on the high side for some things. So the who gives a shit matrix is actually a pretty important model by which to understand whether the problem is worth solving, whether the juice is worth the squeeze. I won't tell you what movie that's from, but that's another line from a movie. So if anybody's really interested, you get extra credit if you look up what movie used the line, the juice is worth the squeeze. And the question is, again, does it matter? Because just because you think the problem is big, you've got to be able to convince more than you and just your friends in order to be able to build a sustainable solution. And the interesting thing, and I think relevant to this conversation and the rest of our discussion today, is going to be much more around healthcare than to this point. But this is the case with every innovation, right? It's definitely not just healthcare. But in healthcare, it matters more because people are on the line, right? And so if you come up with a solution that solves a problem and no one gets it, you haven't helped that many people. Right? You may help some people, and that's great. Like, I don't want to underscore the value of helping even one person. That's phenomenal. I run a small company. When we had 2 customers, we were very happy, right? We knew that we were making an impact in their lives and their experience and their patients, and that's great. And if you have 10 partner clients, that's fantastic. And there's a company in our industry that actually built a remarkable business for itself because it only had about 15 clients. But those clients included the city of Boston, the city of Minneapolis, like the city of Chicago. I mean, they were, the number of customers that you have is not necessarily relevant as to what impact you're making, right? But nevertheless, you probably need to get outside of your immediate sphere of influence to understand whether this matters to the world at large, however you're going to measure that. Or if you're going to, do something that's for an orphan population, for example. Again, I almost worked once upon a time at Genzyme, a company, if none of you is familiar with, is a remarkable organization. They built a massive public company on orphan diseases, right? Diseases that have generally less than 1,000 or 10,000 patients around the world. So the number of patients that you're solving or solving problems for, the number of people you're solving problems for, doesn't necessarily matter so much as the impact, right? I mean, when the impact that Genzyme can make is that your child lives past the age of 3, that's a remarkable impact to every one of the people that it affected, right? So it doesn't need to be en masse; it needs to be effective. And so that gets into the question of what impact are you going to make? Is the problem worth solving? Can you measure it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the question of whether the problem is worth solving is ideally told to you by your end user, right? And so you again, if I if I ask my mom whether I think my idea is good, she's either going to tell me to get lost, no, it's not, try again. Or because she's a really sweet lady, she's going to say, you know, you're my son and I always support you, you know, go get yourself another job. Something along those lines, right? So you need to be able to get out into the world. That is made to some degree more challenging by the fact that lots of us are under quarantine or some version of it right now. But it's not impossible. I gave we're talking virtually now, right? I gave a number of presentations over the weekend at a conference, a virtual conference called ICON. That was remarkable. I've never experienced a virtual conference with 400 attendees. So, you know, it was a remarkable experience to get out there. And you should have seen now, by the way, much more interesting even than reading or than listening to the speakers was listening to the chat and reading the crosstalk and you know, engaging with one another. So there are ways of getting out there. What you see on the left here is my business partner, Chris Witt, presenting at a booth at a conference, right? A little bit of money. You guys see my screen, right? Oh, thank God. All right, the look on the face made me wonder if you were seeing the screen here. All right, so you know, the idea that, you know, you can find conferences, you can find events, you can go and drop a little bit of money and do you know, have a booth, right? Or there are organizations in places like the Bay Area and New York for sure, there's these all the time going on, that are equivalent to meetups, right? And there's sessions where you bump into people, have a conversation, attend a class. You know, there are a lot of professional associations that do get-togethers of one kind or another. Continuing education is usually the banner under which they put them, but it really provides opportunities to sort of bump into people and talk about your ideas. I actually had a booth and I presented at an event not too long ago that was put on by the American Heart Association. You know, an innovation summit kind of thing. And, you know, people drop a little bit of money or Startup Health puts them together and just sponsors a booth and that kind of thing where you can get there and have these occasions. And then you get out there into the field. And that's what you see here on the right side. I was pretty happy at the way something went. But this was us in the field with the city of Alameda Fire Department here in California, where we've been working with these guys for a while and needed to sort of understand some answers to some questions and, you know, whatever. The fact is, most people are happy to talk about themselves. Clearly, I'm a perfect example of this, right? You know, people enjoy the idea that they get to explain their experience and their perspective. So this would sound like a great idea, except that. So, any of you guys seen the TV show House? You're in public health. I certainly hope you've seen it. Nice. Alessandro, very good. I would beware of the idea of deciding to go to medical school because you liked the movie House or the TV show House. That actually hits far closer to home than you might think. I will piss off anybody who is involved in mobile medicine by saying this, but there are a lot of people in our industry who find a lot of inspiration in television shows like Emergency from the 70s. While I can admire that and I can appreciate it, I think it's a little interesting when you get out into the world and you realize it's not like a television show. Just saying, NYPD Blue is not the same as being a member of the NYPD. But
it makes me think about Catch Me If You Can when he tries to be a dog.
Exactly. You know, there are overlaps. I will tell you personally, I have not had to be in court very many times, but one of the times that I did, I was spontaneously presented with the requirement to cross-examine someone, and I was really glad I'd watched a lot of Law & Order. That is a true story. I swear to you, I won the case because I had watched plenty of Law & Order, and I knew what not to do. Let's put it that way. Okay, so everybody lies, right? And I don't think, and it's not necessarily intentional, but I had a conversation just yesterday with a fellow who is an existing partner client of mine, and I needed some feedback on some innovations we put in the field for them. And so I asked him for his experience, and he apologized for about 5 minutes out of a 15-minute phone call before he told me some things he was concerned about. And then he ended up telling me some things he was happy about, which was great. But he was very apologetic about the idea that he was going to tell me things that might not make me happy. And my point was, I don't need to know what makes you happy. I need to know what's real, right? If things are going great, that's fantastic. And if things are not going great, that sucks, but I need to fix it. And if you tell me what you think I want to hear, I'm not getting anywhere in this conversation, right? That doesn't help me do better for you. And if I'm recording you, for example, so you think you're going to get in trouble for telling me either it's great or it's horrible. And by the way, this individual said the same thing. He's like, on the one hand, I want to make sure I'm being nice. Well, I don't really need that. On the other hand, if I'm too nice, people might think I'm washing over the concerns, and we don't want that either. And I said, just give it to me straight, right? You don't help me help you if you don't tell me what I need to know. So the fact that you may go out into the field and say, hey, I'm enthusiastic about helping in public health, and people are their hearts are gonna bleed, and they're gonna want to take care of your enthusiasm, at least as much as taking care of you, right? People don't like to necessarily give you all of the negative, right? How many times you say, hey, how you doing? And they say, fine. And every so often there's the person who actually tells you, I'm having a really crappy day. And you kind of roll your eyes a little bit and think, well, I didn't really think I was going to stand here for 10 minutes giving you a therapy session. Or there's the other extreme of, I'm going to tell you that everything's phenomenal, and my love life is awesome, my professional life is awesome, my house is awesome, everything. And I don't want to say that either, because I might make you feel bad, right? So because maybe you're not having a phenomenal day, so I'm going to hold things, and so I just say fine. And we kind of gloss over these things, and neither of those extremes is helpful when you're trying to build an enterprise. So my recommendation, don't ask, go out, see it. Right? This is where the adjacency comes in. You're going to ask questions if you're smart. I mentioned I was a journalist. We're going to come back to that. But I was a journalist for a long time, and I learned through the craft of doing it how to ask questions and then how to ask more questions. But I've come from a school of journalism that does not believe that coming in with a list of questions is a good idea. There are some journalists who show up with a roster of questions. You see these when you read printed interviews, right? It's question 1, question 2, answer 1, answer 2. I've tended to believe, and actually it comes from New York. If any of you have ever heard of the Actors Studio, which is down at the New School, there was a professor there named James Lipton. He died not too long ago, and he had a television show called Inside the Actors Studio that was famous for this. He did an enormous amount of research. He knew every answer that you were possibly going to give, and then he essentially asked you questions based on what you said. So there were always some preformed questions to spark dialogue when things got quiet. But in general, it was about listening to the answers and then feeding back on them, right? And you're having dialogue. And you could watch any wonderful television news program. Works like this, right? 60 Minutes, that sort of thing. I mean, you see people that interview the president of the United States. They come in with some questions, but that's not what they talk about. Those are really for when the conversation needs to be corralled back because it's gone in a direction they didn't prepare for, or if they don't want to go, or whatever, and you sort of bring it back to home, right? Or if people, the conversation trails off. But again, television news, the late night talk shows, people that get, these wonderful anecdotes and insights. It's really about understanding what people have to say and listening to it and then feeding back on it. Going out and seeing for yourself, getting into the suck, understanding that when they touch a button on a screen, this is an example on the left, and actually in the field, this is me with one of my partner clients in Flagstaff, Arizona, it's the Flagstaff Fire Department, and understanding how they're using the system so that you can understand what you need to do, right? How does it impact, for example, how does it impact your ability to develop technology when they're using gloves, right? If you're building something to be used on a computer, knowing that the gloves are electrically conductive is a critical understanding. Someone might say, I use gloves. Okay, well, some gloves work on a tablet, other gloves don't work on a tablet. Some people use it, some people use a stylus, other people use a keyboard with that same tablet in the field, right? How are you going to understand all of those usability considerations if you don't go out there into the field, right? And so watch, listen, ask questions until you think you understand what the circumstances are, right? And one of the things that is so important, and this is a huge problem right now, by the way, with the way that COVID is being reported. So to the degree that COVID-19 is of interest to you guys, I would absolutely not only encourage, but insist, please, on behalf of everybody, get the hell out of New York City. Get out of Connecticut, get out of New Jersey. Because what's happening in the middle of the country is so different than what's happening in the tri-state area. But there is an interesting challenge that we face when the media are based in New York and DC and Boston, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. So they report what's happening in their backyard. And what's been remarkable is when you read about how full the hospitals are, and Startup Health, as an example, has been trying to help some of its portfolio organizations liaise with hospitals in and around the tri-state area, because a lot of folks are based there, or in California or in Houston or whatever. And they talk about how full the hospitals are. But if you go outside of those metro areas, they're empty. And in fact, hospitals in large parts of the country, most of the country, by many, up until about the last week or two, were empty. People were staying away. It's decimated the patient flow. Right, the mobile medicine business, fire and EMS, transport volumes are down by up to 30% in some cases. So when you hear about what's happening in New York, that's great if you want to work in New York, and that's fine. I mean, you can build a thriving business being in New York, and Dwayne Reed did that. Right? So you can focus just on New York. It's big enough to do that. But if you want to talk about public health writ large, you need to get out of your comfort zone, because on the left-hand side, Delta County, Colorado. On the right-hand side, Mill Creek Volunteer Fire Department in a rural area of North Carolina. I guarantee you their experience is quite different in every way than what it is to do mobile medicine in New York City or San Francisco or Chicago. But those are the places that tend to get the press. And so you really need to go out and see it for yourself. So get out into the field until you think you know something. And then realize you don't. You haven't the foggiest idea. As a journalist, I learned to pretend I knew nothing. And again, if we realize that people like to talk about themselves, people have been in an industry for a long time, like the idea of imparting knowledge to the next generation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's so many reasons why people are generally happy to talk about their experience. And what you realize faster than you'd like, and it can be a very humbling experience, is that you start out pretending you know nothing and you realize you really do know nothing. And the only way to understand what you need to do is to let people tell you what you need to do. And pay attention and take notes and take pictures and be respectful. Ask them if you can take pictures, for example. Understand what HIPAA is. So for example, if you're going to go out there and take pictures in a healthcare context, you better well not be taking pictures of the patients. And by the way, in 2 of these pictures, there are patients present. Notice they are blocked, right? Understanding how, for example, when you take pictures, and you do your user experience testing, which is what we're going to go to in a second, that you need to take care to protect the identities of the people who don't want their identities known, whether that's a patient who may be vulnerable, who you are speaking to, or you're taking pictures of, you're observing. And if you're in a case like mine, and in many aspects of public health, you're going to be talking to them in context of pain, right? And they're not happy to be engaged. Most people don't engage in public health because they like it. They engage in public health because they have to. And you need to take that into account because it's essential to understanding their experience. Empathy goes a long way. And empathy is something that, especially when you are asking questions like, why are you touching the computer? Or what does that monitor do? Maybe you don't want to do that in front of the clinician who's taking care of the patient, because their focus should be on the patient. But maybe saying something along the lines of, what you're doing here is really interesting. can I ask you some questions about it after you're done with this patient? And take notes, put a pin in it. And lots of people are going to be very happy to talk to you about that, because they also realize that building up the next generation of practitioners and the next generation of innovations is not only hugely important, but it's also selfish to them, right? It solves their pain point. If they have a pain point that they want solved, and you're telling me that I'm willing to take the time to understand that pain point, by all means, I want to tell you all about it so that you can solve it for me as well. And that's where we need to go. So there is hope for the fact that you have no idea what you're talking about. And it is encaptured in this book. This was one of the curricular books that I taught from at Boston University. So I'm more than happy to give it a plug. It's called The Art of Innovation. As if any of you have heard of the IDEO, which is the largest industrial design firm in the world, they're famous for having invented things like the Apple mouse. And it is worth watching. There is a segment on ethnography. So for those of you not familiar, ethnography also sometimes goes by another name, which is anthropology. It is the science and art of watching people live, right, in the context in which they are. And there's a segment on, I think it was NBC Nightly News from many years ago, and I watched this in business school as well. So I thought it was great because I already knew their work about how they redesigned, in some cases, or one of their famous cases was redesigning a shopping cart. So seems like a pretty mundane piece of equipment, right? Shopping cart. But in order to do that, they actually put people into shopping contexts, right? You went out into supermarkets and watched. And for example, and I'm one of these people, I leave my cart somewhere because I don't want to lug it all over the store. And I would go to pick things off of the shelf and I bring it back to my cart. So one of the most amazing innovations that they came up with, which is like, how did nobody think of this before, was a cart that had a removable basket. And so instead of the part where you put your kid, where your kid can sit and their feet can dangle out of the front. Well, if you don't have a kid there, because you're not going to leave the kid and then go to the shelf, right? So if the kid's with you, you're going to take the cart. But if you don't have the kid, you kind of got this useless little basket that sits at the front of the cart. What if you could pull the basket out and go with and take the cans of soup and then take them back to the cart? That would be helpful. And so they came up with that by watching how people actually behave, and then say, it's one thing to have an idea of a cart. It's another thing to say, I'm going to have a cart that actually solves the problem, because I didn't know the problem existed until I put people out there to watch and take notes and come up with ideas. And so the first 9 chapters roughly of this book changed my world when it came to entrepreneurship and technology innovation. Really the idea that you start to understand the pain points and whether they matter by getting out into the field and observing people. And that's how you start to understand the pain points that you can not only figure out, but measure. And because as I think it's Peter Draper, right? I believe is the business guru that is often quoted with saying, you can only manage what you can measure, or some version of that. How am I going to prove to you that I can solve the problem if I can't measure the impact of solving the problem? So you got to be able to, and one of my earliest team members, who is our chief medical officer, Dr. Mark Whitman, is a guy who spent more time in school than any human ever needs to. He has an MD, an MPH, and an MBA. By the way, so there's a lot of letters after that dude's name. He has spent a lot of money on tuition. And so this, he has made an enormous impact, and I hope he feels vindicated in this, because once upon a time, he and I sat down at Starbucks, and this was when we were first in our company, and we were talking about how to measure impact and healthcare and patients' lives and healing and all this stuff. And Mark Whitman, MD, MBA, MPH, looks at me and says, 2 things: hard revenues, hard savings. That was it. Hard revenues, hard savings. Okay? You can measure things in lots of different ways, but you're either going to improve resource availability or you're going to remove inefficiency. That's it. And if you can measure whatever you're going to do in terms of those ways, you will win. Now, realize you're talking about public health, right? So sometimes this goes to things like pain, right? Pain is an inefficiency. Pain is something people don't want to have in general. You're in New York. There are places where people go to experience pain. I actually dated a woman who turned out to be a dominatrix. Story for another time. But totally true, by the way. Very odd experience to find that out after the fact. The fact is, if you can remove people's pain, you can measure the impact, right? If you can give them more free time, if you can give them more happiness, you can measure the impact. There are ways of doing that. It's not easy, right? When you start looking at things like what you see on screen here, paperwork reduction, right? Eliminating the need for paper in an ambulance and all the inefficiencies that come from that in terms of fax machines, by the way, because seriously, 2020, people still use fax machines, right? What's the impact of not having your EKGs make it to the hospital? Because the printer, true story, in Wisconsin last July, okay? So EKGs go to hospital sets them to print out, printer has no paper, EKGs can't get looked at, right? What's the impact of that? So you can solve that problem by eliminating the need for a printer, and all of a sudden you're improving healthcare because a clinician can look at the EKG strip in advance of the ambulance arriving, right? As it was intended to do. You would not know that that problem was occurring if you weren't either talking to the fire service, in which case this was in this case, that is experiencing that problem, or the hospital where you would see it occurring, right? Because they're saying, where are the strips? I don't know. Let's check the printer, etc. Right? So understanding how to be able to measure the impact of these issues, and sometimes, everybody familiar with the concept of Occam's razor? All things being equal, the simplest answer is usually right. Okay, that's Occam's razor. All things being equal, the simplest answer is usually right. When you're going to talk about solving problems, I received a piece of advice years ago from a woman named Anne DeGeest, who gets embarrassed every time I give her credit for this, so I keep doing it because it's hilarious to me. Does that make me a sadist? I don't know. Anyway, she changed our world with one challenge, and she's an investor out here in the Bay Area, very, very well-connected health IT investor, very smart. And she said, if you have to try to build interoperability bridges to every hospital in the country or every EHR in the country, don't bother even getting started. You're going to go bankrupt before you start. And there's some truth to that. I don't know that it's 100% true. Our company is actually doing that fairly well. But her point was, as she then continued, is there a way that you could give data to a hospital and let the hospital determine what it wants to do with it? You know, and figure out if it wants to take it. And if it's going to provide value, then they take it. And if they don't have value, then they don't take it. And it turns out that got us starting looking at whether we could solve that problem in a simpler way, right? And just like you see on screen here, if you can solve the problem of handing off paper, you can make process flow. Is there an easier way to solve the pain point? The only way you're going to know that is by getting out and experiencing the pain point. And sometimes those pain points are extreme, right? Sometimes they're big problems. But that doesn't mean, and I am not one to push for incrementalism, so I am not suggesting you solve the small problems and leave it there. But if you're going to build an organization, it is worth considering that momentum breeds momentum, right? And this is the case whether it's getting user buy-in, or whether it is raising money, or it is changing laws, which sometimes have to happen. Success breeds success. So to the degree that you can show I've solved a small problem, I can maybe show that I can solve a bigger problem. And by the way, if I knew this, what I'm telling you now, in 2002, I'd still be in the Army right now. But I did not understand that when you go into the military, I should have watched Full Metal Jacket before I went, not after, but nevertheless, I didn't understand that when they're asking you to make your bed, it's not to figure out whether you can make a bed. It's to figure out if I can trust you with making your bed, maybe I can trust you with a rifle, right? Before I give you the big problem to solve, I want to know that you can pay attention to solving the small one. And I didn't know that going in, so I didn't make for a very good soldier. But if I knew that going in, I would have been able to play the game. And that's really what so much of entrepreneurship is about, right? People talk about pilots. There is a whole school of discussion now around death by pilot. And in fact, I'm one of those people. I think pilots are a disaster for entrepreneurship, and especially in healthcare, because they breed no accountability. Right? There's nothing on the other side. In fact, everybody on this conversation, if I can discourage you with all of my being to say, nope, not going to pilot. I don't do that. No pilots. Never do a pilot again. Ever again, ever, ever, ever. Then I will have done my job. You do small scale implementations, right? You do small contracts, short-term contracts. You have accountability. You have the ability to say, when this is done, there's an endpoint. I get a check. I get a contract. Someone's happy. There's measurement, right? It's not just let's throw it against the wall and see if something sticks, because then there's nothing that makes that the other side say, hey, that worked really well. Let's move forward. But if you've gone through the effort, the pain of engaging with legal and getting a contract done, and then there's success, you have the ability to build on that. So you can do something at a single site, at a single clinic. You can do a 2-week trial. But if the trial is a success, it rolls into a 4-week trial, a 4-week thing, right? It doesn't stop at the end of 2 weeks, and then you have to start the sale over again. And you think about every SaaS business, right? Software as a service business that you can think of, with very few exceptions. And those exceptions tend to get taken advantage of, by the way. Most SaaS trials make you put a credit card down first, right? Because unless it sucks and you want to cancel before the end of the thing, the assumption is you're going to keep going. And so they want you to have some accountability that your credit card is on the line. Same thing here. If you know that you are going to breed some success, and you have a measurable value proposition, and you have managed to achieve your objectives, why shouldn't you be able to continue, right? And so I would encourage you, as you build your organizations, to go in with pretty much a consistent view. Again, there are some rare exceptions to this, but grant funding, for example, our first funding into my company was federal grants. So I can't knock the grant process, but grant funding leads to a tin cup syndrome. There are organizations that have to go back to the well over and over and over again and say, can I have, might I have some more, please? And I know companies that have done the same thing. Like, they never figure out how to stand up a measurable value proposition. So they always have to go back and ask for more money. They never really get to the point where they're self-sustaining. And then they go public and their stocks crater and people wonder why. Some of these problems are big. By the way, I'm coming to the end here. I know we're getting close to time. But some of these problems are big, right? Substance use disorder is not a small issue. I mean, it's a crisis beyond a crisis. And actually, I mean, speaking of a crisis squared, it's actually getting worse amid COVID because people are stuck at home. And sometimes with stimulus checks and no job. So the dynamics of this are really significant. Things like active shooting, public safety, terrorism, not small issues. But the question is, can you start the ball rolling? Can you start people asking, I've been doing something for 30 years, but now I see there's a new way. What's next after this innovation? And by the way, because you're the one who started the first innovation, you're in pole position on the second one too, right? And so innovation begets innovation, and momentum begets momentum, and then all of a sudden you're solving huge sticky problems, and also finding, as I've done, by the way, which I think is wonderful, that there are others in your ecosystem who are solving other facets of the problem. Sometimes you're stronger together, and that interoperability bit is something that the electronic health record world and the health information exchange world learned about 5-6 years ago. Our industry in mobile medicine is just starting to realize that people can, we don't have to eat the elephant all at the same, with one mouth. We can eat it in pieces. And there's that old adage, of course, about how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. But that doesn't mean that you can't share. And altruism is a word that doesn't get spoken about enough in business. It's a huge issue, a part of the conversation in public health. And so I really want to underscore, and this is going to be my last point for today, convenience is not enough. Convenience is a moving target. So the fact that it saves somebody a couple minutes of doing something, you better have something on the other side of that equation. that is more than just it makes my life a little more convenient, because it's remarkable how fast that target moves. And I'm showing these devices for a very specific reason. I want to tell you a quick story of how I approach use case development. So finding out what matters, and that is more than just convenience. A number of years ago, my team started in Pittsburgh. We met with a number of EMS agencies, ground and air agencies in the Pittsburgh area, and talked to them about what they were using, what worked, what didn't work, what did they need, and so on. And one guy, his name was Bob McCon, he was the chief of Pittsburgh EMS at the time. I like to give credit where it's due. He had been telling us that voice to text was going to be the future of documentation, certainly for mobile medicine, but also for other parts of healthcare. People were moving toward get my hand off the keyboard, talk to the computer, and that really was going to be the future. And so we threw this idea out there. Would you be interested in a speech to text type solution? And everybody was talking about how it would save them time, it would save them effort. They're really frustrated by software. They don't want to have to type. They make typos. A lot of the folks that are in EMS and fire and whatnot are not necessarily typists, right? That's not why they got into the business. They don't write essays all that often. So they wanted that convenience, and I said, it's not going to work for me. It's not enough. It's not nearly enough. It's again, because once I give you speech to text, you're going to want something else. As my wife likes to say, you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to ask for a glass of milk. So it's a moving target. And then this one group from a small service in Pittsburgh, in a town called Wilkinsburg, which is a rough area of Pittsburgh. It's kind of like Bushwick in Brooklyn. And it was a transformative environment, still kind of rough. They spoke up and they said, we have a need, we have a use case. We know people who have done care at the patient side in the street using one of these devices, like on the right. It was not a Dell, it was a Panasonic Toughbook, but it was a big, heavy computer. And they've gotten mugged for the street value of that device. Even stolen, it was roughly a couple $100 at least for a computer. And we want to be able to lock the computer in the truck and take care of our patient while we're safe. Sorry, I just got a chill telling the story. The story changed my entire world. We want to be safe and take care of our patient and still be able to do our documentation work so that we don't miss any of the critical details. And I said, that, my friends, is a use case. Right? I have a pain point that I can solve. I have a pain point that has meaning on the other side. I have a pain point that has value that I can put a price tag on, because as an organization, for better and worse, I have to do that. And I have an innovation that will lead to them saying, if you can solve that problem for me, what can you solve for me next? Right? And so I have a business, I have an organization, I have a purpose going forward, where I'm not just creating a feature, I'm creating a product, right? And that product is a collection of needs being solved. And so I wanted to, this is my last slide here, and I really wanted to highlight, this was a colleague of mine who unfortunately passed away from ALS a couple years ago. Bruce Graham is his name. And on the left is a letter from the North Shore Fire Protection District in Northern California, talking about something that is a very big deal in New York, actually, mobile integrated health, which is this idea of taking mobile medicine, fire and EMS professionals, and essentially sending them into context where you're dealing with chronic care patients. In this case, it was dealing with folks with substance use disorder, where they are in the home. It's not necessarily a 911 call. It's, I know you're going to be under the bridge tomorrow, so I'm going to meet you there and try to take care of you. And Bruce, as I mentioned, died of ALS, and he was all about these kinds of things. He was all about understanding that there are use cases that you will discover. For example, when a fellow who was quite literally larger than life, he was a barrel of a man, and all of a sudden gets knocked down by a disease that took him from diagnosis to death in approximately 13 months, 15 months, something along those lines, right? What innovations could we implement, and how can we streamline it such that the people that we love, that change our world, can be helped by them, right? As an example, this concept of community paramedicine or mobile integrated health, going into the home and proactively caring for people before they have a 911 level crisis, that was not allowed in Ohio at the time when Bruce was dying of ALS, right? And so this innovation that he helped us create and the insight to create didn't make it to him in time to be able to help him. And that is a tragedy on a tragedy to me. But it's also an enormous driver to ensure that you don't try to solve the community paramedicine, legal, EMS versus nursing challenges all at once, because that's like pushing on the ocean, right? Solving all of public health is not going to happen in reality. It happens in books, it happens in articles, it happens on cable news television, right? Cable news shows. In reality, success begets success. So when you find that you have done something that achieved the results of saving or alleviating pain for someone like Bruce, for someone like my grandmother, who's shown here on the right, for folks who are quarantined at home with COVID, and you can tell them when they can come back to work or when they need to go home because they're starting to show symptoms that they think are just the common cold or flu, but it turns out the combination of symptoms hints at something else. You are solving individual micro problems that add up to a lot. And that would be my sort of take-home message. The only way you're going to discover what those problems are and how you can make that impact is by going out and being with the people you impact. Again, ask questions, look, listen. Don't be afraid to say, what if you did this or that? And get their minds thinking. You may find that the people that you ask those questions of end up becoming your earliest adopters. And even if they're not your adopters, they can certainly be your friends and mentors. And in trust-based businesses like healthcare, there's nothing really more valuable than those trust-based relationships. So speaking of questions, I don't know if we have time for any, but I'm certainly hoping to answer any of them that you have. Feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. That's okay too. And then I would challenge you to go prove it, just like folks said to me when I said that to them. So thank you so very much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much. It's really great. That's really, really wonderful perspectives in here. It's so awesome to have you on here. And yeah, please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask over the audio or type into the chat box as well. I've just been adding onto the chat box, just providing links to what you were referring to at certain points throughout the presentation. But please, if anybody wants to chime in.
I did say Peter Draper, didn't I? It was Peter Drucker. Thank you for the correction there.
Yeah.
I think I had Mad Men in the mind.
That's what I was thinking too, Donald Draper. Well, just thinking, sorry, does somebody have something to say? No, well, I was just thinking about one of our ventures that's here, developing the product Ella of Ed Fausten and Theo and Kervin. They are developing a data collection platform that does voice to text, and it is great that you brought up that example, and really looking at that at convenience as a moving target and really understanding far more in depth what are these different micro points that you need in order to actually develop a business, as opposed to just making something a little more convenient. And so it's yeah, so I thought that was an interesting case study to relate to, especially coming from their approach and their product that they're developing now.
And I think am I on mute? I don't know if I'm on mute.
No, you're on. I can hear you.
So if anybody, I mean, if they have any questions about it that I can answer, I'm happy to. Obviously, that was just kind of one example.
Great. And do you mind if anybody doesn't necessarily have a question right now? It's okay if somebody has a question down the road. It's okay if they can contact you.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd be happy to do that. I certainly had mentioned that to you once upon a time, that I'm happy to be as involved, in what you're doing as you'd like me to be. I think the fact that you've built and kicked off this accelerator at this particular time is not should not be underestimated. It's quite the context in which to do public health innovation. We're always going to have one crisis or another, it feels like, when it comes to public health in general. But COVID plus social unrest plus weather is about to become a serious set of circumstances in which we're operating. You know, on the mobile medicine side, you know, there's a lot of conversation around that. Certainly, everyone's talking about, you know, come September, how can you tell the difference between influenza and COVID, right? But the folks out in the trucks are saying, well, we're about to have a hurricane season in the south. You're going to start to have nor'easters and serious weather considerations in the northeast and the mid-plains, the upper plain states. Tornado Alley is alive and kicking right now, and we're about to enter fire season in the west. So things are going to get really interesting. And so again, when you look at, again, success begets success, but there's really no shortage of contexts in which the various innovations that you guys are going to come up with in this course, I'm sure, can get applied to many different facets of those circumstances. Again, it is a moving target, but you know, if it's not COVID-19, it's going to be COVID-20 or 21 or whatever comes next. There's always going to be something. So no shortage of need.